The glare of the Senate Judiciary Committee's lights poured down like interrogation beams, reflecting off the polished wood and the anxious faces of those seated beneath them. Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh adjusted in his chair, his expression taut with the effort to appear composed. What had begun as a routine oversight session was on the verge of spiraling into one of the most extraordinary moments in recent judicial history. Just a few minutes earlier, Representative Jasmine Crockett had stepped through the chamber doors, her stride calm, her presence commanding. In her hand was a thin blue folder, unremarkable at first glance, yet impossible for Kavanaugh to ignore. His gaze, usually steady and unreadable, betrayed a flicker of recognition and unease as it landed on that folder again and again. Justice Kavanaugh, thank you for being here today, Crockett began, her voice even, precise, carrying the authority of someone who had argued in front of judges her entire career. The Texas Congresswoman, a former civil rights attorney with a reputation for surgical questioning, set the folder gently before her, its contents hidden, but heavy with implication. Millions of Americans tuned in to the C-SPAN broadcast could sense something different in the air. They didn't yet know that inside that simple blue folder was a confidential Supreme Court memorandum, one never intended for public release, a document chronicling internal discussions about a landmark ruling that appeared to contradict Kavanaugh's sworn statements during his confirmation hearings. The memo contained what appeared to be Kavanaugh's own handwritten notes, the kind that could call into question whether he had been entirely truthful under oath. I'd like to start today, Crockett continued smoothly, by discussing judicial transparency, particularly the space between what nominees tell this body during confirmation and how they actually govern once seated on the bench. Kavanaugh's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his glass of water. The committee chair, unaware of the storm brewing, leaned forward curiously. In mere minutes, one document from that folder would ignite a confrontation unlike anything the Supreme Court had ever faced on live television, a moment destined to echo through history. Crockett's rise in Washington had been swift and deliberate. Her precision in legal reasoning and her calm under pressure had earned her a coveted seat on the House Judiciary Committee, an extraordinary position for a freshman lawmaker. Her background as a constitutional lawyer made her both fearless and meticulous, traits that would define this moment. Representative Crockett, you have 15 minutes for questioning, the chair announced, unaware that those 15 minutes were about to rewrite the rulebook for congressional hearings. Across from her sat Justice Brett Kavanaugh, the once fiercely debated nominee of 2018, whose confirmation had polarized the nation. In the years since, he had kept a low profile, preferring the sanctuary of the court's closed chambers to the political theater of Capitol Hill. But today, that sanctuary was gone. Justice Kavanaugh, Crockett began, her tone professional but sharp-edged. During your confirmation hearings, you made multiple statements about your judicial philosophy, especially concerning precedent and settled law. Would you say your rulings have remained consistent with those assurances? Kavanaugh leaned into the microphone, his voice carefully controlled. Congresswoman, my record speaks for itself. I have ruled with fidelity to the Constitution and to precedent, exactly as I pledged. Crockett nodded once. And would you also say that your private deliberations with other justices reflect that same fidelity? Kavanaugh hesitated, only for a moment, but long enough for viewers to notice. Our deliberations are confidential, as is tradition, he replied. Of course, Crockett said, still calm. But my question is about consistency, between what's said publicly and what's argued privately. Behind the camera's unblinking lens, a larger truth hung in the air. What the public didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, a Supreme Court clerk had approached Crockett's staff, alleging that certain internal discussions contradicted Justice Kavanaugh's testimony to Congress. After verifying the materials through multiple independent sources, Crockett had made a bold decision to confront him directly, in public, with the evidence. She had prepared for this moment the way a seasoned attorney prepares for cross-examination. Slowly, methodically, setting the trap without letting her witness see it coming. Justice Kavanaugh, she said now, turning a page inside her folder, I want to revisit your statements on Roe v. Wade. During your confirmation, you described it as settled law and a cornerstone precedent of the court. Do you stand by that statement today? I do, Kavanaugh answered quickly. That was my testimony, yes. Crockett's hand moved to the folder again. Then perhaps you can help clarify this. She lifted a document into view, the blue of its cover stark under the lights. 2 years before the Dobbs decision, you circulated an internal memorandum to several conservative justices, calling Roe an opportunity to correct a constitutional error. The room went silent. Even the faint hum of the cameras seemed to fade. Kavanaugh froze, his expression flickering from confusion to alarm. The chair straightened, eyes narrowing. "I'm not familiar with any such memo," Kavanaugh said, his voice tightening, but the subtle tremor in his hand betrayed him. Crockett's tone remained steady. "Perhaps this will refresh your memory." She held up the document for all to see. Dated March 15, 2020. Addressed to Justices Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch. Later shared with Justice Barrett. "It bears your signature." The hearing erupted in whispers. The chair's gavel slammed repeatedly for order. "Representative Crockett," the chairman said sharply, "if you are referencing confidential Supreme Court documents, I need to know the provenance of this material." "Mr. Chairman," Crockett replied coolly, "these documents were provided to the committee through lawful whistleblower channels from an individual concerned about potential misrepresentations made to Congress. And I remind this body that Supreme Court deliberations are not classified, nor protected by executive privilege." She turned back to Kavanaugh, whose composure was visibly unraveling. "Justice Kavanaugh," she said, her voice unwavering, "this memo includes the line, and I quote, 'While public messaging on precedent is strategically necessary, the current court composition presents the chance to correct this constitutional error.' Would you care to explain how this aligns with your sworn testimony?" Kavanaugh hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Congresswoman, without full context, I can't comment on selective quotations." "I'm happy to provide context," Crockett replied, flipping the page. It continues, "We should wait for a case without the complications of the Louisiana statute, allowing a more direct challenge to Roe rather than incremental erosion. Does that help refresh your memory?" The tension was unbearable. Republicans shouted objections. Democrats leaned forward, sensing history in the making. "Point of order, Mr. Chairman." A Republican cried, "This is an ambush using possibly stolen documents. Justice Kavanaugh deserves prior notice." The chair's gavel hovered in midair. "The concern is noted," he said cautiously, "but the witness is present and may respond." As the procedural arguments unfolded, all eyes remained locked on the justice. Kavanaugh's usual confidence had drained from his face. His counsel leaned in, whispering frantically, but his eyes never left the paper in Crockett's hand. "Mr. Chairman," Crockett said clearly, cutting through the noise, "I have additional documentation for the record." She lifted another sheet, an email from Justice Kavanaugh to Chief Justice Roberts, dated 1 week later, referencing the same memo and stating, quote, "It would be prudent to maintain public ambiguity about our intentions regarding Roe until the appropriate case arises." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in as Kavanaugh's expression hardened into something between disbelief and dread. The chairman's gavel struck again, his voice rising above the din. "Congresswoman Crockett, while this committee certainly maintains oversight authority," and just like that, the entire nation leaned in, closer, watching as the line between judicial secrecy and congressional accountability blurred live on air. "I'm concerned about the method by which these alleged documents were obtained." "Mr. Chairman," Crockett replied without hesitation, "the Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that the public interest in exposing potential wrongdoing outweighs confidentiality concerns when there are questions about misrepresentations to Congress. I believe Justice Kavanaugh is familiar with those precedents." The pointed reference to legal principles that Kavanaugh himself had upheld in recent decisions left him in a difficult position. He could hardly argue against his own judicial reasoning. "Justice Kavanaugh," Crockett continued, seizing the momentum. "A simple question. Did you write this memo discussing strategies for overturning Roe while publicly testifying it was settled law?" All eyes turned to Kavanaugh. The hearing had transformed from routine oversight to a moment of genuine constitutional drama. His response would either defend his integrity or confirm the existence of a shadow strategy that contradicted his sworn testimony. "You need to consult with counsel before responding further," Kavanaugh said, his voice strained as he turned to whisper urgently to his attorney. Crockett waited patiently, the document still visible in her hand. The C-SPAN camera zoomed in on the header of the memo, capturing enough detail that viewers at home could see the Supreme Court letterhead and Kavanaugh's name. After a tense 30 seconds of whispered consultation, Kavanaugh turned back to the microphone. "Congresswoman, internal deliberations among justices are confidential for good reason. They allow for the free exchange of ideas and perspectives." "I understand the importance of confidentiality, Justice Kavanaugh," Crockett replied evenly. "But my question is about reconciling your public testimony with private actions. These aren't just academic deliberations. This memo outlines a specific strategy to publicly convey one position while privately pursuing another. She held up another document. And I have here the minutes from a private conference among the conservative justices dated September 2020, where you specifically advised, and I quote, "We should be careful not to telegraph our intentions on Roe until after the election and the new appointment." The reference to timing strategically waiting until after Justice Barrett's confirmation caused another stir in the hearing room. Several Democratic committee members were now frantically passing notes among themselves, clearly caught off guard by the revelations their colleague had kept closely held until this moment. Kavanaugh's face had drained of color. The measured judicial temperament that Supreme Court justices carefully cultivate was crumbling under the precision of Crockett's questioning and the weight of the documented evidence she continued to produce. "Justice Kavanaugh," Crockett continued, her voice remaining professionally calm despite the escalating drama. "Did you write in a private email to Justice Thomas that, and I quote, 'Our public statements about respecting precedent have successfully provided the necessary cover for our colleagues facing tough confirmation fights?'" The question hung in the air for a painfully long moment. The Republican side of the committee sat in stunned silence while several Democratic members couldn't contain audible reactions to the explosive allegation. When Kavanaugh finally spoke, his voice had lost its judicial authority. "I don't recall any such communication," he said weakly. Crockett nodded, as if his denial was anticipated. "Then let me refresh your recollection." She held up a printed email with clear highlighting. "This is dated February 12, 2021. From your official Supreme Court email account. Would you like me to enter it into the official record?" The chairman, now visibly uncomfortable with how the hearing had developed, cleared his throat. "The committee will take a 10-minute recess to consider procedural questions." "Before we recess, Mr. Chairman," Crockett interjected smoothly, "I'd like to enter one final document into the record. This is a handwritten note from Justice Kavanaugh to Justice Barrett, congratulating her on her confirmation and stating in Justice Kavanaugh's own handwriting. Now we have the votes to overturn Roe, as we've discussed." The camera caught Kavanaugh's physical reaction in real time, a visible flinch followed by a panicked glance toward his counsel. It was the kind of unguarded moment that Supreme Court justices trained in maintaining impassive judicial demeanors almost never display publicly. That note is dated November 2020, just weeks after Justice Barrett's confirmation and a full year and a half before Justice Kavanaugh joined the majority opinion in Diaz, claiming that the decision to overturn Roe was based solely on constitutional interpretation rather than any predetermined agenda. Crockett concluded as the chairman's gavel came down for the recess. The damage was done. Viewers across America had witnessed not just the revelation of the documents, but Kavanaugh's physical reaction to them. A reaction that communicated more than any verbal response could have. The justice's credibility was crumbling in real time on national television. When the committee reconvened 10 minutes later, Kavanaugh's demeanor had changed entirely. Gone was the confident jurist, replaced by a man clearly engaged in damage control. "Mr. Chairman, before we continue, I'd like to make a statement," Kavanaugh began, his voice noticeably more measured, suggesting the recess had been used for intensive preparation. Internal deliberations among justices often include exploration of various legal positions and strategies. These confidential discussions are part of how the court functions, and they don't necessarily reflect final positions or personal beliefs. Crockett nodded thoughtfully, then delivered her final question. "Justice Kavanaugh, are you saying that when you told this committee under oath that you considered Roe's settled law while simultaneously writing memos about how to overturn it, you were just exploring various legal positions?" The pointed question, framing the contradiction in its starkest terms, left Kavanaugh with no room to maneuver. The silence that followed, lasting several seconds as millions watched, was his most damning response. Within minutes of the hearing's conclusion, the hashtag Judic Kavanaugh memos began trending nationwide with clips of the confrontation spreading across every social media platform. News networks interrupted regular programming to analyze what many commentators immediately described as the most significant congressional oversight moment involving the Supreme Court in modern history. By nightfall, major newspapers had convened emergency editorial meetings to prepare special coverage. The Washington Post's headline captured the gravity. "Constitutional crisis. Kavanaugh documents reveal potential testimony contradictions." The New York Times followed with supreme contradiction. "Kavanaugh's private memos versus public testimony." Legal experts from across the political spectrum flooded cable news shows to debate the implications. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe called it a seismic moment for judicial accountability, while conservative legal scholar Jonathan Turley acknowledged that if these documents are authenticated, They present serious questions about candor under oath. Court watchers noted the unprecedented nature of the revelation. The Supreme Court Hasselways operated with extraordinary confidentiality, explained CNN's Joan Biscapi. What Congresswoman Crockett revealed today isn't just about Kavanaugh. It potentially pulls back the curtain on how judicial confirmations have been strategically approached by nominees wary of revealing their true intentions. The White House issued a carefully worded statement. The president believes in the independence of the judiciary and the integrity of congressional oversight. These are serious allegations that deserve thorough investigation through proper channels. Supporters of Justice Kavanaugh rallied quickly, questioning the provenance of the documents and accusing Crockett of an ambush tactic. These could be fabricated, taken out of context, or illegally obtained, argued Judicial Crisis Network's Carrie Severino on Fox News. This looks like a politically motivated hit job. But the visual impact of Kavanaugh's reaction, his visible panic captured in high definition and replayed countless times, proved difficult to counter. Body language experts analyzed the footage, with one telling MSNBC, "What we witnessed was a textbook example of someone confronted with evidence they didn't expect to exist." The physical reactions cannot be easily dismissed. For Congresswoman Crockett, the aftermath brought both acclaim and intense scrutiny. Progressive groups hailed her as a hero for judicial accountability, while conservative organizations filed ethics complaints alleging improper handling of confidential court documents. Legal defense funds for both Crockett and the named whistleblower raised millions within days. The institutional fallout extended far beyond a single hearing. Chief Justice J. Roberts announced an internal investigation into the source of the leaked documents while defending the court's deliberative process. Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin called for hearings on standards of candor for judicial nominees, while several House members introduced a Judicial Transparency Act that would create new disclosure requirements for Supreme Court justices. Constitutional scholars debated the most serious question: what happens when evidence suggests a sitting Supreme Court justice may have been less than truthful during confirmation? The Constitution's good behavior standard for judicial tenure had rarely been tested, and never in such a high-profile manner. Legal blogs exploded with analysis of potential remedies. Some argued that only impeachment could address the situation, while others suggested that public pressure might force a resignation. Law school ethics classes hastily rewrote syllabi to include the Kavanaugh memo's case as required reading. Perhaps most significantly, public opinion polling showed an immediate impact on the court's already declining reputation. A Gallup flash poll conducted 2 days after the hearing found public confidence in the Supreme Court had dropped to an all-time low of 18%, with 76% of Americans believing the court had become too political. 1 week after the hearing, in a move that shocked Washington, Justice Kavanaugh announced he would temporarily recuse himself from certain categories of cases pending the completion of inquiries into the documents' authenticity. The limited recusal, unprecedented for a sitting justice, was widely interpreted as an attempt to relieve pressure without admitting wrongdoing. The long-term implications became the subject of intense speculation. Legal historians noted parallels to the court-packing controversy under FDR, when external pressure led to a dramatic shift in the court's jurisprudence. "We may be witnessing another switch in time that saved 9, suggested Yale law professor Akil Rita, referencing the historic moment when the court changed course to avoid institutional reform. For everyday Americans, the episode crystallized growing concerns about institutions once considered above politics. As one viral tweet with over 1 million likes succinctly put it, "When judges have secret agendas, do we really have rule of law?" 2 months after the hearing, in a lengthy feature in The Atlantic, the unnamed whistleblower finally came forward. A former Supreme Court clerk who described being morally compelled to reveal the documents after witnessing the gap between public assurances and private plans. The article sparked renewed debate about the ethics of whistleblowing versus institutional confidentiality. The most lasting impact came not from any single policy change, but from the fundamental shift in how Americans viewed judicial confirmations. In subsequent nomination hearings, senators from both parties began demanding more specific commitments and expressing open skepticism about generalized assurances regarding precedent. As constitutional law professor Melissa Murray observed in a widely shared analysis, the Kavanaugh-Crockett confrontation has permanently altered the relationship between Congress and the court. The era of valuing nominees to avoid substantive positions through carefully crafted non-answers may have come to an end. For Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman who had prepared meticulously for her moment, the aftermath brought both professional acclaim and personal cost. Death threats required enhanced security, while legal challenges regarding her handling of the documents consumed significant resources. Yet, her unwavering response echoed her closing statement at the hearing itself. When fundamental rights hang in the balance, the American people deserve complete honesty from those entrusted with protecting our Constitution, especially those with lifetime appointments. The constitutional drama that began with a blue folder on a committee room desk had evolved into something far more significant: a national reckoning with judicial transparency and the boundaries between necessary confidentiality and essential accountability in a democracy.